Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us for Financial Education Program Evaluation Design. Today I'm going to start off the webinar with just a quick question and answer. What organization are you representing today? If you could just locate the question and answer section of the webinar platform and answer that question. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to utilize this section. And we will answer your questions when the appropriate time is available. Great, the answers are rolling in. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and we will unmute you. Yep, we have representation from Milax Band of Ojibwe, Tribal Housing Programs. Patrick says, I don't know where the Q&A is. You are in the right spot, sir. Muskoka Economic Development, Nez Perce Tribe, and Nimiipuu, and Tulalip. Well, thank you all for typing in. Now I know that you can hear me, and we're good to go. So next, I'd like to pass this off to Caleb Selby, the Programs Officer here at First Nations Awista Corporation.
Hey everybody, my name is Caleb and I'm a Programs Officer here at First Nations Awista, as Stephanie was saying. And I work in the Financial Education and Asset Building departments as well as the Capacity Building department. So that's me. Let's just jump right into it here. So I'll be talking about a lot of different things in this webinar. And so first I'll be talking about the importance of evaluation just in general. Why do we need to be evaluating? And then I'll be talking about program evaluation specifically. And once I get into program evaluation, I'll be explaining the main components of that. And then once I've gone through the typical components of program evaluation systems, I'll be talking about common problems that you might experience in program evaluation. And then I'll be jumping right over to best practices of evaluation systems. There's a lot of times where I'll say, in this webinar, you should be doing this or you should be doing that. And I just wanted a slide to hold all those recommendations. And then I'll be jumping into a case study to explain everything that I've talked about using concrete examples. And the case study will be First Nations Awista's, one of our evaluation systems for our KeyBank initiative, which I'm really excited to talk about. And then finally, I'm going to leave you all with some additional resources that are going to be really helpful for you in financial education program evaluation design. So next slide, please. So we've continually, and we being First Nations Awista, we've continually told you that evaluation is important for all of your programs, and not just for financial education programs, but for all your programs. So I wanted to discuss just very generally why. And there are a couple of reasons. The first reason is that using evaluation tells your story to all of your stakeholders, which are usually your community, your partners, and your funders. Of course, each organization might have some other stakeholders, but those are the main ones. And what evaluation does is it creates the data that you tell to those stakeholders. The second reason is for assessment of progress. It's just the tracking. It's looking at what we did as an organization with our programs over time. So this involves asking questions like, are we accomplishing our mission? Well, how do you know if you're accomplishing your mission? And the answer is that evaluation helps us to know. And the third objective is that we want to track performance of our programs. And this involves asking, what are the participants of our programs learning? How can we grow to help them learn better? And I'll go into more detail with this later, but the big idea is that it allows you to track performance. And it might sound similar to the second reason I was just talking about, but it's less it's more specific. It's looking at specific measures rather than general progress tracking, like assessing whether you're completing your mission. So next slide, please. So the previous slide was about evaluation in general, and I want to speak a little more specifically about program evaluation and its purpose. So the first purpose is that it helps you build knowledge of your clients. And so with program evaluation, you can have questions like, what do your clients want and what do your clients need? You can have those questions answered. And you can also look at who are your clients demographically and socioeconomically. You can have those kinds of questions answered as well. And this will help you create different indicators and metrics that you will use to measure success. So for example, if when building knowledge of your clients, you find out that your clients don't know what payday lenders are, then maybe you focus some of your teaching in your financial education class on what a payday lender is, and then through program evaluation, you focus on finding out how much your clients learned about payday lenders. So building knowledge about clients helps all of your other programs too. So for example, you might find through program evaluation that your clients don't have much of a credit history and they're interested in owning their own business. So these two things taken together might lead you to a need for a credit builder loan. Another thing that program evaluation does is that it helps you to quantify impacts. So in the form of a question, this looks like, what does your program do? So you can say, via program evaluation, that your clients are saving X dollars by applying the budgeting skills learned in your class. You could say, for example, that X percentage of your participants or clients are more likely to be looking for ways to save money when they're shopping after taking your class. So these are just examples of program evaluation allowing you to quantify exactly the impact that your program has with your clients and in your community. A third thing that program evaluation enables you to do is identify client and instructor areas of growth. So you can ask, where can clients be doing better? Is there a particular content area that they're struggling in? And then maybe how could this be improved? So for example, maybe your clients are not understanding amortization schedules very well, and you could then wonder, how can you mitigate this problem? Program evaluation also enables you to find out what you, as the instructor, might be doing poorly. Because many times if certain content isn't well received by clients, it's that the teacher could improve. And this should be framed as a plus, I might add. It's a way to improve rather than something to look down on. So for example, one thing that we find commonly is instructors' teaching methods aren't resounding with clients as well as those methods could be. So that's an example of what program evaluation can tell you about your instructor's teaching methods. The final thing that program evaluation enables you to do is assess success and approach of the program. And I gave the example earlier of if you find that your community lacks knowledge about payday lenders, then you can measure success of your program by the knowledge gained in your clients about payday lenders. So you could find out if they're aware of the payday lenders in your community after the class. You could find out if they can define what a payday loan is, or if they can pick out what a payday loan is from other types of loans. You could see if they know how to responsibly manage a payday loan and not get caught in payday lending cycles. If you set goals for your clients to gain all this knowledge, then program evaluation enables you to see if you've reached this goal, if you've reached those goals, or maybe if you've fallen short, how short you fell and how you might be able to reach your goals next time. So program evaluation is great because it allows you to do all these different things which are really important to the continued success of your program. Next slide, please.
Going backwards.
Uh-oh. Okay, so now getting into the specifics of program evaluation, and specifically financial education program evaluation, I want to go through the different components of evaluation, the life cycle, if you will. If you're starting from scratch, you'll want to follow this timeline, and we'll have a slide to talk about each. The first is to identify objectives, and it's really key that you start here because you don't want to start creating evaluation tools if you don't know what you are trying to accomplish through evaluation. The second is developing tools, and we'll be looking at what mechanisms are best for you to do evaluation. And then we'll be looking at conducting the evaluation and talking a little bit about an idea called trade-offs. Then we'll be talking about analyzing your data, and this is the fourth component. We'll be talking about this on more of a surface level, since realistically we could have a whole series of webinars on data analysis for program evaluation purposes. And then finally we'll be talking about how to refine your evaluation systems. Because as with any good system, the first time that you use it, you're bound to find ways that it can work better for you later. Next slide, yeah, perfect. So the first component in making an evaluation system is to decide what you want to accomplish with the evaluation system. It's really not unlike creating a financial education program itself as it relates to the development process. You have to ask first, what do I want to accomplish? If you're creating a financial education program, you might decide what you want to accomplish using a market study. And you can see that your target market maybe doesn't have a lot of credit history. So you might offer financial education that focuses on credit and how to responsibly manage it. So while you probably don't have a market study to define what you want to accomplish through evaluation, you do need a way to identify what you want to accomplish. And I think giving some examples might help here. So one common objective is finding out how well the content of your financial education class is transferring to your clients. So we commonly see under this objective, organizations want to know, am I creating knowledge change in my clients, or am I creating skill change in my clients? Am I creating even further behavior change in my clients? And these are all great sub-objectives that fall under the objective of finding out the change that your program inspires. So another common objective is finding out the success of your program. And this is similar to the first objective, but it just takes it a step further. You need goals for your financial education program for this objective to work. But once you have your goals, you can compare what your financial education class is transferring to your clients against your goals. So going again with the previous example, you might have a goal of 80% of your participants being able to tell what the 5 C's of credit are. And then you can compare the number of clients that end up being able to do this to your 80% goal. And so that's a good way to gauge success. Another type of objective that you can have is to find out how well the class is working for your clients. And I mean, in regards to approach, you can ask, do clients like the instructor? Do they not like the instructor? Do they like the class? Do they like how it's offered? Are they easily able to attend the class, or is there a different time or place that would work better for them? So all this to say that you can ask questions that evaluate the approach of your class rather than its content. So those are just 3 possible objectives that you might have for an evaluation system. You can have all of them or none of them, and there are many others, and I'll have some resources at the end of the webinar that lay out common objectives of evaluation systems. Next slide, please. So the second component of evaluation systems is developing tools. And there are many different types of ways that you can evaluate a financial education class or program. You can use survey tools, you can use observations, you can use interviews, and all are valuable in their own right. And I'll talk mostly about survey tools in this webinar just because most financial education classes have enough clients that logistically it doesn't make sense to try to interview all of them. And observations are useful too, but they're less useful to funders and other stakeholders usually. Funders especially want hard quantitative data. And of course I don't want to speak for all funders here, but most funders. And also on the topic of observations, funders will be less likely to fund only on observations. Your board of directors will want more than observations that your financial education program is a good thing for your community and creating positive change in it. And I would like to say, though, that for other objectives, observations can be really useful. So for example, you might make an observation that your financial education classes held during the holidays are less attended than during other parts of the year. And so this is a really valuable observation that you should consider in refining your financial education class. So that example goes along with the idea that all evaluation tools are valuable in their own regard. And I didn't talk too much about interviews yet, but they are helpful in that you get longer and generally more in-depth answers than survey tools or observations are going to yield. So you should utilize all these if possible, but just know that certain ones are more valuable for certain uses. To get funders to fund your program, survey tools and interviews would probably be most valuable. Observations are most useful for you and your organization internally, but to maximize the effectiveness of your financial education program, you should think about using all of them if you can. Next slide, please. Perfect. So as I was saying, I want to focus on developing surveys, since I think most people listening to this webinar will be interested in surveys. So one thing to consider in developing surveys is how often do you distribute? And this is important because there are many different ways to quantify your impact. But if you want to measure knowledge gained or behavior change, you need a baseline. And baseline data translates to a pre-class survey. In a pre-class survey, you can ask all sorts of questions and collect all sorts of data: demographic information, socioeconomic characteristics, current financial tendencies, current financial products and services used, current knowledge on popular financial education topics. The list goes on and on. All this data tells you is information about the client before the class, or your baseline. Now, do you want to do post-surveying as well? Of course, a post-survey opens the door to knowledge gained, which is hugely valuable in communication with different stakeholders. You can ask the same kinds of questions as with pre-surveys, and so you can start those questions with, after this class, I now do this, and so you can quantify knowledge gained through your financial education class. But there is a trade-off here. With post-surveys, there's additional data entry. There's additional staff time that must be devoted to evaluation, and of course there's additional cost. So do the benefits outweigh the costs? These are good questions to ask, and they're not really right answers to the questions. The best answer differs for each organization and for each community, and it may even vary by program within an organization. So it's important to ask these kinds of questions for each evaluation system. In the same way that you decide whether post-surveys are worth it or not, you can ask the same question about a pre-survey. You might think that you only have time for post-surveys and you're not going to do pre-surveys. At that point, though, you lose the baseline data and you lose the ability to quantify knowledge gained or behavior changed. You can still say that knowledge was gained, but you can't quantify it without pre-survey data. The other thing to consider here is that the decisions that you make are fairly important because it's hard to go back on them. And I'll talk more about this in the common evaluation problems section of this webinar. But once you change your evaluation systems, consistency in data is harder to maintain. And I said that you can measure behavior change using pre and post surveys, but that's actually not entirely true. So how you can measure a client's behavior change, how you can be sure a client's behavior changed if they say that in a post survey right after the class. You can do surveying X amount of time after the class to quantify that behavior change. So say 6 weeks after the class, you email all of your clients a survey. Through this survey, you can see what they're doing differently in their lives 6 weeks after the class. Are they creating more budgets? Are they comparing costs of similar items at the store to see which is cheapest? But again, the same trade-off has to be considered here. Do you have the time and the money to have a staff member collecting and managing and analyzing that data? The third component of evaluation systems is conducting the evaluations. As you conduct evaluation, there are a few things to consider. And that's how, the first is, how are you going to distribute your evaluation tools? do your clients use email accounts? And if so, can they be relied upon to answer a survey that you email to them? If you do distribute via email, who's going to be in charge at your organization of making sure everyone inputs answers correctly? Because believe it or not, it's easier. It's very easy for clients to input incorrectly if there's not a teacher on hand to clear up any confusion or questions that they might have. You might decide that it makes more sense to have hard copies distributed and collected during the class. And this is the same trade-off principle as before. If you do hard copy surveying, you're more likely to have respondents complete the survey, but then you have more work for yourself. If you're using interviews, you might ask, when is the best time to do the interviews? Also, are you just going to interview all of your clients or just a subset of them? If you do just a subset, and you might have to for logistical and time reasons, how are you going to ensure that that subset is representative of all of your financial education clients? Also, if you're conducting interviews at certain time intervals after the class, are they going to be conducted over the phone? Are clients going to be expected to come back into the office or the meeting space where the financial education was held? Another thing to consider with interviews is that if the instructor is conducting them, then clients might not be inclined to give the most honest responses that relate to the evaluation of the instructor. And this is important. You want to be getting evaluations that reflect what clients actually think. So if one of your objectives is to find the strengths or weaknesses of the instructor, you'll want to be sure to set up evaluation in a way that makes clients comfortable with sharing their real opinions. And then finally, if you're relying on observations, you'll want to make sure that there's a way that you can double check that your observations are the same as observations that other team members might have. Next slide, please. So the fourth component of evaluation is data analysis. And I'll start with the logistical considerations around financial education, the data analysis for program evaluation. With whole classes, you won't want to analyze data with just a pencil, paper, and a calculator. So what are your other options? Could you maybe use Excel? If that's the route you go, how do you get the data into Excel? What many organizations end up doing is using free survey software. So popular clients include SurveyMonkey and Google Forms. I've also heard of Survey Gizmo and Survey Planet, and I'm sure there's a lot that I don't know of. And later when I'm talking about our KeyBank initiative, I'll be talking about SurveyMonkey, since that's what we use. And I'll have some examples of the functionality that you gain with SurveyMonkey. So that's one thing to consider, the client that you're going to use to organize the data that you collect from evaluation. Next, you'll want to be analyzing the indicators that you'll be using to measure success. And you really have to think about these from square one. Ideally, the thought work to inform this question was done in component one, where you identified the objectives of the evaluation. And again, these indicators fall into different classes. There are those that help you assess the impact that your class is creating, and then those that help you assess the approach and delivery of the class. So we'll talk about one indicator that would fit each type. So let's say that one of the objectives of evaluation that you identified is figuring out what time of day and what day of the week is best for clients to attend your financial education classes. And say that while developing tools, you developed a question that asks clients to check mark which time of the day and on which day of the week works best for them. So in analyzing data, you should look at the most popular days of the week and popular times, and that can help you assess the approach and the delivery of your class. Another example of an indicator would be, say that you identified clients' understanding of the 5 C's of credit as an indicator of the success of the class. You could look to the questions in your evaluation tools that relate to their understanding of the 5 C's of credit to see how many clients gain that knowledge. And if you set a goal of, say, 80% of your clients being able to know all 5 C's, then you can see how many of your clients did and then see if you met that goal. And if you've thought out really well what your indicators should be, then they'll be particularly helpful for you, and they make data analysis faster than it would be otherwise. But that said, you don't want to focus just on the indicators. You want to see the whole story that your evaluation data is telling you, not just the story that the indicators tell you. And to make sure that this is happening, you can have multiple staff look at the data and see if everyone notes the same themes and comes to the same conclusions. And as I was saying earlier, we can make a whole webinar out of data analysis, but this is good surface level stuff to be considering as you develop or refine your financial education evaluation system. Next slide. So after the first 4 components of evaluation have been carried out, the last stage is to refine your evaluation, which is to say, after everything is done, you have a chance to look at your evaluation system and ask, what worked well, what didn't work well, and what could I improve on? And usually what happens is that this will have nothing to do with what the data is telling you from your surveys. It'll be something like, you didn't like passing the surveys out right at the end of the class because many of the participants left before they completed their survey. Or maybe you realize that you don't like how one of the questions is worded and you just want to change the wording up of a question a bit. You want to leave its idea the same, but just the wording of the question a little bit because maybe it was confusing for participants. So in other words, you'll find that what you didn't like about your evaluation system is something that's easily improvable, and that has to do with the delivery or approach of the evaluation system. That's not to say, though, that more substantive changes won't come to your attention. So, for example, as the macroeconomy changes, you might find that clients' wants and needs are changing, and so you might want to change your evaluation system to go with these changes. So, for example, you might find that you want to add parts to your evaluation system that assess what clients are learning about credit reports through your class. In this component of evaluation, you can add that content to your survey tools. And this was just a small example, and it'll be up to you in the first component where you identify the objectives of your evaluation system to identify what you want these changes to be. Next slide, please. So one topic I wanted to talk about in this webinar is common problems in evaluation. The first issue that I wanted to talk about is consistency in data entry. Many organizations have multiple people that do data entry, so making sure that everyone follows the same protocol is really important. Because a lot of times what happens is that the same questions will come up a lot of times in different staff. So say that someone actually enters their birth date in a field on a survey that's asking for the date that they took the survey. What is staff supposed to do here when they're entering data? Because if you leave the field blank, your data analysis down the road might be incorrect. Another common problem is what to do if people enter different contact information on their pre- and post surveys. And this is really common too because people have different email addresses, and sometimes they might enter their work phones on one survey and their cell phones on another. And so it's good to create a protocol, a document that notes these issues and how your organization wants to deal with them every time. And you can also update that protocol as you go along. You probably won't foresee all the problems that could come up in evaluation, and so when they do come up, you want to be able to record them so that everyone on staff and eventually, even further down the road, eventually even new hires can come on to your staff and read these documents and be familiarized, and they can be familiarized enough to jump into the process and be able to contribute to it without making the same mistakes that staff made previously. Another common problem in evaluation with survey tools that I see is incomplete surveys. So if your surveys are too long, then clients are less interested in getting all the way through them. And so to mitigate this problem, you could incentivize the completion of your surveys. You could also explain to your class the value in the evaluation. If you explain that completing the surveys will help your organization, which will in turn help the community, people will be much more inclined to fill out the entire survey, and that'll be less of a problem for you. Another big issue in evaluation is consistent data tracking after you make changes to your evaluation system. And this is a problem because there are a million reasons you might want to change your evaluation system and your evaluation tools. You might want to start collecting information for a new funder. You might start trying to collect information to get interest from a new funder. You might find that certain questions on your survey tools become outdated and you want to remove them. You might want to delete just certain parts of a question but keep the rest. And these are all common reasons you might want to make changes to your evaluation tools, and there are a lot more too. But it suits your organization to be really strategic about when you make changes to your evaluation system and your plan about moving forward with those changes, because really where you don't want to end up is writing a grant report or an annual report or a 10-year report or anything like that, and you realize that you overhauled your evaluation system, and so you have really inconsistent data to report. You have some metrics that you can say apply to certain years and others that apply to other years, and it just makes the story less, it flows worse than it would otherwise. So this is really important to consider as you're refining your evaluation system. And then a final problem in evaluation systems is keeping institutional knowledge. Staff turnover is just a natural part of life for an organization. So if you lose the person that was in charge of evaluation, you want to be sure that there's enough institutional knowledge to get by without this person. And this institutional knowledge could be in the form of documents like the protocols that I was mentioning above, or maybe another staff member that knows the intricacies of the evaluation system and can explain to a new staff member, or maybe assume the evaluation responsibilities themselves. And ideally, you can have both so that you can respond to any possible situations that you might run into. And as with other slides, I probably didn't capture everything that could go on here, everything being common problems that you might run into with evaluation. And so my general recommendation is the best way you can respond to problems in evaluation is to make strategic decisions in response to those issues. So you could discuss these problems in a staff meeting, or you might contract with a consultant. There are lots of organizations out there that specialize in evaluation that are available to assist you in overcoming any problems that you might have with your evaluation. Next slide, please. So I also wanted to take a second to talk about best practices in evaluation. Throughout this webinar, I've said a lot of times that you should do this thing or you should do that thing. And so this is the slide that has all those shoulds on there. So first is always be making sure that your evaluation system is doing what you want it to do, or more technically, using the jargon that we used in the component section of this webinar, make sure it's accomplishing the objectives that you set out for it. The moment that it feels like a burden without any of the added benefits, it probably needs revisited and likely changed. The fourth bullet, leadership support, is big here too. If you have a leader at your organization constantly reminding staff of the importance of evaluation and the data entry especially that comes along with evaluation, staff will be more likely to put in the effort to evaluate. Another best practice is to make sure that evaluation efforts are consistent among staff and that your evaluation systems can survive staff turnover, some of those common problems I was talking about. And so institutionalization is key to making this a reality. And another thing to say is, and maybe it's a no-brainer, but I really wanted to bring it up in this webinar here, is to make sure you use the data that you collect. Annual reports are a great place to show all the impact you're creating if you can't show it in other places. But otherwise, grant applications and grant reporting are common places to use it. You can also display it to your board of directors. If they ask you, why are we doing this program or why are we spending money on it, then the data from your evaluation will be a good answer. So basically, I just wanted to highlight, just find a way to communicate the information to all of your stakeholders. Nonprofits are notoriously busy enough that they can forget to reap the benefits of their hard evaluation work. So I just wanted to say, make sure to not forget that part, because it's what makes it all worth it. So another best practice is to use all of the data that you can. It's common to overlook the data that relates to approach and delivery of the class, when in reality, that data is extremely important too, because you can't create impacts in your community if your financial education class isn't working for your community. So that data is equally important as well. And I mentioned leadership support earlier, but it's valuable in its own right. Your leaders are likely the most knowledgeable of your clients. They have likely been in the industry the longest, and they also likely have been involved with other evaluation efforts. And they can be trusted to guide your evaluation system in the right direction. Next slide. Great. So that's a lot of the theory of
Before we get into the case study, there was a question that popped up at the beginning of the presentation asking if the sample of the verbal presentation would be available, and it will be. We will send out a follow-up email right after this webinar with a copy of the recording along with the webinar slides. So just wanted to let everyone know, and if you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to utilize the Q&A section of the webinar platform.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, if anyone has any questions about what I'm talking about, just send them in, and we'll stop and get them answered for you. So I spent a lot of time talking about the theory of developing evaluation systems, and I wanted to give everyone a case study to kind of provide concrete examples for you to think about. And the case study that I'll be using is our KeyBank initiative. So I'll give a short little summary first. At OWISTA, we have a Native financial education curriculum called Building Native Communities Financial Skills for Families. And this is a really commonly used financial education curriculum in Native communities, and we really think it's really beneficial in the changes that it creates in Native communities. So we, along with First Nations Development Institute, developed this curriculum in 1999, and it started being circulated in 2000. And OWISTA does national train-the-trainer classes on this curriculum, which is where a trainer conducts a training that prepares a financial educator to effectively offer this curriculum. So then what happens is many financial educators will start using this curriculum as the curriculum that they teach in their financial education classes to their communities. Well, we wanted an evaluation system for this curriculum. So I'm going to walk through all the components as well as the common problems and best practices with you all for this case study, so we can kind of see how we at OWISTA applied this evaluation system theory to our own programs. So component one was to identify objectives of the evaluation. So when we sat down and identified objectives for this initiative, we hammered down that we wanted to know about behavior changes of clients after taking a B&C class. So we sat down and looked at the content of the B&C curriculum, and we created questions that pertain specifically to that content. So the first section of B&C relates to what it means to be a consumer and the role of the consumer in the broader community. So we form a question that rates how likely someone is to understand their role as a consumer within the broader community. And all questions went through this same process. So the second bullet of that photo that you see on the left-hand part of the slide there, the second bullet says, think about my values before I spend my money. That follows this rule too. This idea is discussed in another of the earlier sections of the B&C. So this question assesses if that section is creating change in client knowledge and behavior. So these are just examples. We were going through creating these kinds of objectives. And we were less focused on approach and delivery of financial education programs, and this was partly by design. One detail that I haven't given yet is that OISTA, through this initiative, we work with several pilot sites, and these pilot sites are all very capable and experienced financial education providers. So we were just less worried about that and more focused on what the KeyBank or what the BNC curriculum itself is accomplishing. So the second objective, the development of evaluation tools, came next. And we identified that we wanted surveys, since we're going to be writing a study on this. We knew that we needed hard quantitative data to be able to write that study on. So we went with surveys, and we developed questions like the photo that you see on the left hand of the slide. I mean, it's from our pre-survey, so pre-class survey. So we are getting baseline data with this question. So we're seeing, how much our clients are already thinking about this stuff, so that after BNC class we can see what's changed. Without the baseline data, we wouldn't have been able to draw conclusions about the changes that BNC is making. Also, as we developed specifically to this question, we wanted to say that clients went from being unlikely to likely to do some activity or apply some skill. So we decided that these matrix rating questions would be really valuable. So that's an example of how you can apply these evaluation components to individual questions. Another decision that we made in this stage of the game was how often did we want to distribute the surveys. We knew that we wanted a pre and post survey to quantify the knowledge gained after a financial education class that uses BNC, but we also wanted to show behavior change. So what we ended up going with was 4 to 6 weeks, 6 months, and 12 months as good time intervals to reach back out to clients. So at the 4 to 6 week interval, we felt that we got a good look at the changes fairly quickly after the class. So the lessons the client learned are still in their short-term memory, and they're able to still feel motivated to make changes after the class. And then at 6 months, we see which skills and behaviors that were taught in the class maybe got forgotten or just aren't maybe worth the work that they require. And then at 12 months, we're getting a good look at long-term financial behavior change after a financial education class that uses BNC. So all that to say, at this stage of the game, we were deciding the intervals at which we wanted to reach out to clients. So the third piece, actually conducting the evaluation, required some thought. An OISTA staff member needed to be able to reach out to the clients of financial education programs all across Indian country. And so logistically, we were just wondering what's a good way to do that. And so we landed on asking clients to write down their phone numbers or their email addresses so that we could reach out to them at the specified intervals to administer the survey tools. The pre and post surveys are a little more simple. We have the pilot sites hand those out to clients at the beginning and end of classes. A tricky part of this was figuring out how to get the pre and posts uploaded somewhere they could be analyzed, because we didn't expect the pilot sites to upload them themselves. So we decided that having them mail the surveys here would be the next best thing, and that's what we do actually to this day. I just got some surveys in the other day. So finally, in data analysis, a lot of the logistics are taken care of, because as I was saying, the surveys get mailed here and we upload them into SurveyMonkey. So they're in a database with good analysis ability and functionality to download as a PDF or into Excel if we want to do even further analysis. So the next thing to talk about for this component, the data analysis component of program evaluation, is the indicators that we identified. Well, for question 5, which is the one that's on the left side of your slide there, everything could be an indicator. There's a section in BNC on the costs associated with different financial transactions and some narrative on how those costs can be minimized. If you look at the last bulletin, or that last bullet there, in that photo on the left, we could use the change between pre and post for that bullet as an indicator of how well that section of the BNC is being absorbed by the clients. If we see a big change, then that would be an indication that the content is being well received. If we see a small change, then that would be an indication that that content maybe isn't being as well received as it could be. And one thing that came up here that I want to mention is that when we were looking at data points for all of our pilot sites, we actually have 9 of them. We noticed a lot of change for some of the pilot sites between pre and post, and not so much in other pilot sites. And so what we figured out was that some of the pilot sites clients were just coming up, they were coming into the classes with higher levels of baseline data. So it's also important to contextualize the data as you're analyzing it. And this is valid even for evaluation systems that aren't done on a national level. So finally, the final component of program evaluation development is the refinement of that evaluation. And so one of the ways that we looked at refining, for example, the question on the slide here was to see if any new content in the 5th edition of the Building Native Communities financial education curriculum, which came out last year, we wanted to see if any new data points made sense to go on this question. And so this question actually didn't undergo any changes, but other questions did. And so this is just an example of how you could look at this question and think about refining it. And so one other thing to say, while we would like to be continually refining, we have restrained ourselves in the interest of data consistency, which you'll remember is one of the best practices that I was talking about. Great, so that was the development process of our KeyBank evaluation system, or just a snippet of it. And I had wanted to just give a concrete example. I do want to give a concrete example of a trade-off that we've experienced in this evaluation system. As you remember, I was talking about this idea of trade-offs earlier in the webinar. And I just wanted to mention a concrete one because I think they're really important mechanisms for deciding what's best for your evaluation systems. So one of the trade-offs was having all of the surveys from the pilot sites sent here. So we currently have 407 pre-surveys and 407 post-surveys, which, as you might guess, means significant data entry time. And this isn't even counting the 4 to 6 week or 6 month or 12-month surveys that we have administered. So luckily, we found a great partnership with KeyBank that knew that this data entry time was integral to good evaluation. So we were able to write that into the budget. And I also wanted to give several examples of common problems that we've had. One common problem has been making sure that pre and post surveys are properly linked in our database when they get uploaded. The examples I gave earlier about birth dates and class dates being mixed up is one that I actually see all the time. And I also see phone numbers and email addresses changed up between pre and post surveys. And these data points are important because it's how we link surveys together. So it's been important for me to have a method to make sure that pre and post surveys are properly linked up before they're uploaded in the face of potential issues like this. So I have also created a protocol document to make sure I always follow the same rules in fixing any of the problems, this one included, that might come up on when the surveys come into me. So next slide, please. So just really quickly, I wanted to show everyone some of the functionality inside of SurveyMonkey in case you're at a stage where you aren't sure which client you want to use. And we enjoy SurveyMonkey because it's free and it has all these different kinds of charts in here. I mean, as I was saying before, everything can be downloaded to Excel if you want to do further analysis, which a lot of times you might want to make more advanced connections or do more advanced analysis of your data. And there's actually another example of this on the next slide. You can even use SurveyMonkey to analyze textual data if you'd like. So if you're asking more open-ended questions, or even if you aren't just using SurveyMonkey to analyze your interview data, it can work for that too. And so the above representation is called their word cloud functionality, and it tends to be good for grant reporting if you've collected textual data. For our KeyBank initiative, we send out an annual instructor survey every year, that asks which communities and demographics all of our BNC certified trainers serve. And so everybody writes in all different kinds of communities and demographics that they serve. And I like this word cloud functionality for looking at that data. So next slide, please. Finally, I wanted to leave everyone with a few additional resources that I think are worth mentioning. The first is, as I was developing this webinar, I was looking at all the program evaluation resources out there, and it turned out that program evaluation is the subject of lots of university research, which is to say that a lot of really smart people have spent lots of time thinking about the best evaluation systems and all their different components. And one university that I found with good resources is the University of Minnesota, and I included that URL above partly because its resources pertain specifically to evaluation for financial education programs, and they have different webinars on their website as well as evaluation manuals and logic models, which are really helpful in assisting you to identify evaluation objectives. They have toolkits, they have sample surveys. There's all kinds of great information and tools available there. Another resource that I want to mention is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's Financial Wellbeing Scale. The Financial Wellbeing Scale is fairly new, and what it is a whole survey that is designed to accurately and consistently measure financial well-being. And there are many different ways that you can use it. It can be used once. It can be used to track changes in financial well-being over time. It can be used to compare financial well-being against subsets of a population. It can be used in lots of different ways. And there's a user manual and other great resources on that URL that I have up there. And this could be good for people that don't have the time or the resources to develop a whole survey on their own. You could use this survey or parts of it and get good information via evaluation, and maybe just not have to put in such a large amount of time on the front end. And next I have our OEISTA's BNC Instructor's Guide. And this was developed alongside the BNC curriculum for financial education practitioners. And it offers guidance on all the stages of program design, as well as best practices and tried tips on teaching each section of the BNC. And the reason that I mention it in this webinar, in this context, is that there's a section on evaluation, and it pertains specifically to financial education classes that are using BNC. So it may be of assistance to those of you that might be using the BNC curriculum. And next I put up the University of Wisconsin's Financial Capability Scale. This scale is a set of standardized outcomes that provide a good indication of a client's financial capability. And again, this is a good resource to look at if you're at the very beginning stages of creating an evaluation system. So maybe you don't know what your objectives are for an evaluation system, or maybe you don't know exactly what you want your surveys to look like. This scale is a great place for you to go to get these kinds of questions answered. And the URL that I provided also takes you to a PowerPoint that gives a presentation on the scale. So for those of you that are more interested in learning about that scale, you can go there. Next slide, please. Great. Does anyone have any questions?
Feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute your line, or use the question and answer section of the webinar platform. In the meantime, while we wait for questions to roll in, I just want to plug that please keep an eye out for our upcoming webinars. We have a particularly interesting lineup for this summer, but please visit our website, www.oeista.org, for our upcoming training.
Great, and I don't see any questions rolling in right now, so Stephanie is going to send out an email with this PowerPoint and some of the other resources that I just mentioned after the webinar, and she'll include my contact information in there. And I just want to encourage anybody to reach out to me if you have any questions or if you just want to chat about stuff.
So Great. We have one question. In developing your financial education program, would you want to teach the same topics over and over or new topics?
I would say that you can use your evaluation system to answer that question for you. So what I would do is, in my evaluation system, I would identify as an objective the wants and needs of my clients and my community, and I would form my financial education class around those wants and needs. So I would teach the same topics over and over if those are the wants and needs of my clients and my community, or if maybe they start to get interested in other topics, or maybe they need other content. I would be changing it up and teaching new stuff. So hopefully that answered your question.
Okay.
Well, great. So that's it with the questions. Feel free to reach out to me, everyone, if you have any questions about anything.
Thank you again for joining us, and look out for our follow-up email. Have a great day.